What if your ability to work, travel, or even access public services became dependent on a single piece of digital code? That's not science fiction. That's the core of Starmer's BritCard plan. Within days of the announcement, over 1.6 million people signed a petition condemning it as a push toward mass surveillance. Cybersecurity experts warn that housing everyone's most sensitive data in one central system is nothing short of providing hackers with a golden target. Whether or not they say it, many feel their fundamental privacy, freedom, and control over identity are at risk. This is not just policy, it's a turning point in how we define digital citizenship. Number 1. A hacker's dream. Imagine every citizen's name, date of birth, photo, residency status, and more, all stored under one digital umbrella. That's precisely what critics call Starmer's digital ID plan, a single point of failure that hackers would be salivating over. Cybersecurity experts warn that any centralized system holding deeply sensitive information becomes a high-value target. In the real world, data breaches are increasing, and government systems have not always been perfect. The more information held in one place, the greater the potential damage if it's exposed. Some believe that distributing data across multiple systems, as messy as that is, offers more resilience than one giant monolith. Users on forums echo this. Holding all your information in one place is a hacker's dream. Worse still, calls for tech firms to manage parts of the infrastructure raise fears of vendor lock-in and backdoors inserted under the guise of efficiency. The risk is not merely theoretical, it's baked into the very architecture of a system designed to centralize. Number 2. The price tag nobody wants to carry. The government claims the digital ID scheme will be free for citizens, arguing it will simplify access to public services and crack down on illegal working. But the real cost lies in designing buildings, securing and maintaining the infrastructure, costs that can spiral fast. The UK's history with large IT projects is rife with overruns and failures. When Tony Blair's biometric ID scheme was scrapped, it had already eaten up billions in sunk expenses. Now critics warn that Starmer's BritCard rollout could repeat that mistake, especially given the complexity of handling biometric data, encryption and cross-system integrations. The risk budgets balloon, timelines slip, and promised savings never materialize. Another hidden cost is vendor dependence. If tech firms become essential pillars of the system, their fees, licensing and potential lock-in could put the state in a squeeze. Some commentators argue that the burden of constant software upgrades, audits, and security reviews will burden the public purse far more than anticipated. Number 3. Millions sign up. When Starmer unveiled the BritCard proposal, critics wasted no time mobilizing. Within days, a petition demanding the abandonment of mandatory digital ID crossed 1.6 million signatures. It argues that requiring citizens to register under a state-controlled system amounts to a dangerous step toward surveillance and centralized control. The campaign's momentum has drawn attention across party lines. The Liberal Democrats have made opposing the scheme a central plank of their platform, warning that forcing digital ID usage will penalize older people, those on low incomes, and others already excluded by the digital divide. Civil liberties groups highlight that even surpassing 100,000 signatures mandates government response, though they caution that formal debates rarely shift entrenched policy. This groundswell of opposition sends a clear signal: many citizens feel coerced, not convinced. The strong ration suggests that no matter how the government frames the benefits, public sentiment is already turning the plan into a political liability. Number 4. Vulnerable people risk being locked out. Mandating a digital ID for work opens the door to exclusion of the most vulnerable. Human rights groups warn that many older citizens, people with disabilities, the homeless, or those without smartphones and digital skills could be unable to use the system. The Open Rights Group cautions that the UK is sleepwalking into a pre-crime state by pushing everyone into a digital surveillance net, and warned of harm from system failures, errors, and exclusion of those least able to engage online. Even the government states that while digital ID will be mandatory for right-to-work checks, citizens won't always have to carry it physically, implying fallback accommodations will be required for those who can't use the digital route. Experience from digital benefit and welfare systems shows that those already marginalized face the biggest burden from gaps in access. If the design doesn't include robust non-digital alternatives or intensive support, The digital ID scheme risks turning essential services into privileges for the connected, not rights for all. Number 5. The legacy of Blair's ID failure haunts the new plan. 15 years ago, Labour's biometric ID card proposal collapsed under public backlash and spiraling costs. Only around 15,000 cards were issued before the scheme was scrapped. That history isn't ancient memory, it sets a precedent. Critics ask, what's really changed now besides the name BritCard? Back then the system was derided as intrusive, ineffective, and expensive, and it was quietly shelved once political winds shifted. Today's plan still faces the same core challenges: privacy fears, technical complexity, and political risk. Some say the new proposal seems like a resurrection of a failed scheme, repackaged for modern times. Given that past failure, the current rollout must overcome deep public skepticism, avoid repeating old mistakes, and demonstrate how it will handle oversight, security, and individual rights differently. Otherwise, this new digital ID could become not just controversial, but another costly lesson in how not to build state identity systems. Number 6. It won't halt illegal migration. Despite its central justification, the BritCard is criticized for overpromising on tackling illegal migration and shadow employment. The Good Law Project argues that digital ID won't reduce migration because past systems, even where ID is widespread, haven't succeeded in eliminating underground labor markets. In fact, many in the informal economy don't use formal documentation already. A mandatory ID doesn't force them into compliance. It just opens loopholes for those excluded. Critics further warn that if the digital ID becomes the only valid proof to work, it may penalize people who cannot access or use the system, without necessarily cutting illegal work. The government claims this scheme will make the UK's borders more secure and reduce the pull factor for illegal entry. But skeptics note that many variables drive migration and employment underground, from wage disparities to enforcement capacity, and a digital ID by itself won't address these complex root causes. Number 7. Regional resistance. In Scotland and Northern Ireland, Starmer's BritCard proposal is already met with fierce criticism. Scottish leaders argue it threatens regional autonomy by implicitly forcing people to declare themselves British, undermining identities that are not strictly tied to the UK. Northern Ireland's reaction is even more fraught. Sinn Féin leaders have called the digital ID plan an attack on the Good Friday Agreement, warning that it could infringe on citizens' rights to identify as British, Irish, or both. Some unionist voices say the scheme is yet another layer of bureaucracy that will not meaningfully curb illegal migration but risks eroding privacy and freedom. This resistance highlights how identity, sovereignty, and politics intersect. A one-size-fits-all digital ID imposed from Westminster may not sit well with those in devolved nations or border communities. It's a political red flag. A policy that doesn't respect local sensitivities and complexities is likely to face both legal and social backlash. Number 8. Businesses warn of compliance burdens and hidden costs. Many small and medium enterprises are already voicing alarm at the prospect of mandatory digital ID checks becoming part of hiring protocols. The new requirement would force employers to integrate BritCard verification into their onboarding systems, adding complexity and operational overhead. The concern is that already stretched HR departments will be forced to invest in software, staff retraining, and ongoing audit procedures. Tech contractors and consultants may see short-term gains, but critics warn of vendor lock-in. Once private firms supply core components of the ID verification infrastructure, switching costs will soar. With government estimates placing infrastructure contracts in the £1–2 billion range, private sector dependence could shift substantial power and data control into corporate hands. Beyond compliance, many businesses fear the plan may push hiring underground. Employers who already ignore strict checks may continue to hire off the books rather than engage with a burdensome system. Critics argue this undermines the very goal BritCard is meant to achieve, cracking down on illegal work while penalizing legitimate businesses that attempt to comply. Number 9. The political credibility gamble. Introducing mandatory digital ID now puts Starmer in a high-stakes position. The scheme was not in Labour's manifesto, which means many perceive it as a sudden reactive policy pivot rather than a well-tested commitment. This makes it vulnerable to criticisms of cynicism or desperation, especially from opposition voices capitalizing on perceived overreach. Already internal tensions are showing. Some Labour MPs and grassroots members question whether the party is pushing too far too fast, especially given that many citizens remain deeply uneasy about handing over more control to the state. This isn't just about winning headlines but sustaining voter confidence in a very polarized political climate. If the digital ID rollout encounters delays, security failures, or unexpected costs, Starmer risks turning a key campaign promise into a political liability. The opposition is already framing it as an assault on civil liberties. Missteps here won't just provoke backlash, they could recalibrate the balance of trust in his government's competence and intentions. Number 10. Global skepticism. As the UK revives its ID debate, international experience warns of pitfalls. In several European and non-European countries that introduced mandatory digital identity programs, privacy scandals, data breaches and public pushback have followed implementation. An academic survey across EU countries underscores that citizens may accept government identity systems in theory but recoil when data is shared with private actors or security is compromised. The UK government claims BritCard will adopt top-tier encryption and best practices from Estonia and other nations with strong digital identity systems. Yet criticism lingers. Many criticize the lack of clarity about data decentralization, oversight, or redress mechanisms. Observers note that even systems labeled privacy first have struggled when scaling to nations of tens of millions. Vulnerability emerge in linking databases, third-party vendors, and emergency use exceptions. With the world watching, Britain faces both a chance and a warning. A success in digital ID might become a model, but failure could amplify caution internationally. Opposition voices will not merely push back locally, they'll cite global failures to fuel further resistance at home. After exploring 10 concrete reasons why Starmer's BritCard digital ID plan is already backfiring, one thing becomes clear: this is not just a policy shift, it's a gamble with privacy, public trust, and democratic balance. The warnings from cybersecurity experts that such a centralized system becomes an enormous hacking target cannot be brushed aside. The backlash, more than 1.6 million signatures opposing the scheme, shows the public is not willing to hand over control blindly. Governance challenges, costs, exclusion risks, political divisions across the UK, and comparisons to failed past proposals all amplify the danger. The comparison to Blair's shelved ID plan underscores how easily a grand project can collapse under public pressure and technical failure. Repeating those mistakes now would be a consequential misstep. If Starmer's government proceeds without transparent safeguards, robust oversight, and alternative pathways for those unable or unwilling to use digital systems, the BritCard risks becoming a liability rather than a reform. The future of individual rights and state power is intertwined here. If this breakdown resonated with you, hit like and subscribe for more deep dives into policy, tech, and democracy. Drop a comment which reason hit you hardest. And check out our next video on how digital identity is shaping global governance.